Welcome to Monologues by Hassie, where I'm going to be dropping unsolicited brain dumps from the depths of my grey matter. I'll talk about life, money, society, and self-development, plus whatever else lies up there, whilst hopefully not getting cancelled in the process. In episode 60, I spoke about my journey to becoming a software engineer. One thing I've noticed in myself and amongst other people who've transitioned into new careers, into different fields, is that there is an innate sense of imposter syndrome. And imposter syndrome is, best way to describe it, it's just like the name says, it's when you feel like a fraud. It's where you believe that you don't deserve to be where you are and that you've somehow managed to trick everyone into the current position you're in. So you feel very undeserving of where you currently are. And I think the world of technology and software engineering is a great example because it is a career where you see imposter syndrome in people who have been working in the field for decades. And it's the nature of the way that technology evolves and develops that people will continue to have software engineering for their whole careers. And I think there's valuable lessons that can be learnt from that because the people who thrive in that environment are okay with being imposters and they actually realize that their skill set is not in one particular technology, but it is their ability to solve problems as a whole. So to get into imposter syndrome, if I talk about my own experiences, I've always felt like a bit of an imposter. And I think that's very natural because you're learning something new and it doesn't matter what environment you're in, you will be typically surrounded by people who are far more experienced than you when you start doing something for the first time. So it is very natural to feel like a complete fraud. In my case, I happen to be in the very privileged position where all the engineers I work with have 10 to 20 years of experience. They're very senior and I'm somebody who's just entered the field. So there's a tremendous gap in terms of my level of experience and their experiences, and it's very noticeable. But the beautiful thing is I can definitely leverage the experience they have and accelerate my own development, which is always a nice thing, but it leaves you feeling like a complete fraud. And that's a very problematic thing because undeniably, if I look over the last 1 year, where I've officially worked as a software engineer coming out of data engineering, I definitely I feel like a fraud on a day-to-day basis. But then if I actually look back and look at the skills I've developed over the last year, so if I take a bit of a longer term perspective going back into my experience, I can say, wow, you've actually developed so much. It's crazy that you still feel like a fraud today, 1 year later, and you felt like a fraud on day one. And then that feeling of being a fraud hasn't changed, but your skill set has actually grown exponentially. And which leads to the realization that in certain fields, you're always going to feel like a fraud. And I'll give a great example. There are periods where I get very comfortable with the code base. I learn a new design pattern. I get comfortable with the technology. And all of a sudden, we have a new system that we're implementing. And I'm using a brand new piece of technology. It could be a new type of database system. I might be going from SQL to no SQL. And all of a sudden, you've got to learn something new, learn how to work with it. And you go back to square one. You feel like an imposter again because you're not doing the same thing day in, day out. And in comparison to some other professions, with software engineering, you are constantly going to be changing and evolving. Even within the same company, there will be evolution. If you change jobs, you are typically going to have to adapt to different styles of working, different pieces of technology they're working on, different domain areas. Remember, software engineers exist to solve problems. We exist to make users happy. And depending on where we're working and who we're working for, those users are going to be different. They're going to have very different needs. You could be working on TikTok one day, you could be working on a banking application. There's such a vast array of things you could be working on. There is no wonder why feeling like an imposter syndrome is so prevalent amongst the tech industry. It's just the way things work. The problems change, the technologies change, the companies change. The methods of the best ways of work are constantly changing. So it is very common for somebody who's had 15 years of experience and they've got a wealth of a proven track record of being able to deliver different pieces of software, still feeling like an imposter because they're faced with a new piece of tech, something new that they have to learn, or a new domain area that they have to understand to be able to create their software. And this is not exclusive to software or tech. This happens all over the place, but 100% in the world of technology, I think that feeling of being an imposter is greatly amplified. It's so easy to fall into it. And then when you feel like an imposter, this can be used against you. And the way it's used against you, especially in the technology world, is sometimes the business types who realize that they require software engineers or data analysts or data scientists or data engineers, whatever kind of technical fields they need, they want this to be as commoditized of a workforce as possible. And if you feel like an imposter, you might not stand up for yourself and negotiate for yourself in a way that serves your best interests. So despite being very experienced and being able to solve problems, if you feel like an imposter, you might not actually fight for yourself, and that's going to hurt you at the end of the day. But the one thing that I've learned from the really senior people is that they learn to embrace that feeling of uncertainty. Given that they are in a career where the amount that they have to learn, it's just so vast and broad that, within a human lifetime, you will never know it all. You'll just learn the bits that you need to do something, right, in the short term. And your career will just be many, many different periods of learning different things to implement something new, that you become comfortable with not knowing anything. And you realize your expertise lies in being able to learn something new and implement it. And whilst you might not know that new programming language or that new framework that just came out, you have experience in learning a similar framework and a similar, another programming language, and you've been able to develop in that. So you believe those skills are transferable. And that is a way in which I see a lot of people overcome, or at least learn to manage, their feeling of being an imposter. And this definitely happens when anybody changes into a new job or a new profession. You feel like an imposter. You feel inexperienced compared to your colleagues, and you might feel like you don't deserve to be there. But remember that somebody clearly saw something in you to allow you to occupy that position. And not only that, all your prior experiences can be used to inform either your current job, especially if there's highly transferable skills, or it is evidence that you have the capacity to learn what you need to learn to be able to do what it is you need to do. And in that sense, imposter syndrome can be greatly managed. But it's not an easy thing because, as I said, I face it on a week-to-week basis. In my job, I will go from a period of feeling comfortable, 3 to 4 weeks of comfort, and all of a sudden I'm back to feeling like I'm in kindergarten again. But again, when I look back in time, this is where the most growth happens. So it's something that I just need to learn to embrace. It's not an easy thing, because I still do feel like an imposter on a day-to-day basis. But I realize my skill set is being able to learn things, and it is being able to implement things. And that only gets better over time. Because I've often been in the situation where myself and a much more senior programmer, we're both learning the same thing for the first time. Could be a brand new framework. And one thing I will notice is that they will do it so much faster, but they still need to go through that journey of learning. And I'll still get there. But I realize the skill is in being able to learn and implement something new. And that just, as you iterate, as you solve new problems, as you feel uncomfortable and feel challenged and enter new environments, that process of knowledge acquisition and then implementation into a tangible product just becomes faster and faster. And you become better at doing that. So that's where the magic lies. And I've realized that it is okay to feel uncomfortable. Really, this podcast is just a reminder to myself that it is okay for me to feel uncomfortable, but that I do deserve to be here, that my skill set has increased, and that I can do great things. If you're facing imposter syndrome, have a good retrospective view of what it is that you've actually accomplished. And chances are, you probably do deserve to be there. So with that, I'll leave it, and I wish everyone listening to this podcast great success on all your endeavors. You've just made it through another episode of Monologues by Hassie. It brings me great pleasure to know that you made it to the end. To listen to more episodes, subscribe on your favorite podcast app or visit monologuesbyhassie.com. Thanks for swinging by.